Hey everyone, today we are talking about this behemoth of a lens right here. This is the Canon RF 85mm 1.2L lens. Okay, first let's talk about the design of this lens. This is a pretty heavy lens, and paired with my Canon EOS RP, it is definitely front heavy. So if you're looking for something that's lighter that you can take on backpacking trips or longer day trips, this is probably not your lens. If you're looking for compact, I would probably say maybe go with Fuji. Even though their cameras are crop sensor cameras, the image quality that comes out of those cameras is really amazing. They also have a 50mm f2 prime lens that is their almost an 85mm equivalent, but that lens is super sharp and the autofocus is really fast too. Another camera that you can consider getting if you're looking for compact for travel or backpacking is the Nikon Z50. The kit lens that comes with that camera is awesome, super sharp, and really versatile. I don't really think that people that are looking for a fast portrait prime like this are really looking for something that's compact. I think that most people that want something like this want a higher quality lens, which is what Canon provided. Personally, I don't care that this lens is heavier, and it doesn't really bother me that it's front heavy on the EOS RP. If it bothers you, you can get the EOS R, which is a little bit bigger, or you can get the extension grip for the EOS RP, which will make handling a lens like this a little bit more comfortable. The first thing that I noticed when I got this lens is that this front element right here is really big. It is so big that I was initially like uncomfortable even taking the lens cap off because this thing is so exposed. So I think for the first time ever, I'm considering maybe getting a UV filter just to cover this up and protect it a little bit more, but actually I probably won't. So you got the manual focus ring right here, and it's definitely really nice and smooth. You have a focus distance limiter right here. So basically if you set this to full, then the autofocus might be a little bit slower, but if you want to limit this so that you are only taking pictures at a further distance, then this will probably speed up your workflow a little bit and you'll be dealing with faster autofocus speeds. So everything that you would expect in a premium lens like this in terms of lens coatings, you have it in this lens. So it has the fluorine coatings to help from moisture and dust on that front element. There's a blue spectrum refractive element in this. This is a relatively new optical element that Canon's starting to place in their higher end glass, and basically what it does is it'll cut down on those chromatic aberrations, so you'll see less of the green and the purple fringing in your photos. I think that the only other lens that they've used that in is the EF 35mm f1.4 Mark II lens, but if I'm wrong about that, let me know. They also have some fancy coatings in here to help cut down on the flare and the ghosting that you'll get in your images. I think Canon calls it their air sphere coating. When I was shooting with Nikon, they labeled their lenses that had a similar type of coating as nano crystal coated. When you're shooting in backlit conditions or if you're shooting into the sun, you will notice that you get a decent amount of flare from this lens, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The autofocus on this lens is driven by a ring type ultrasonic motor. Considering that there's 13 elements in this lens and some of them are really big and heavy, the autofocus is actually pretty fast, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. This lens is weather sealed. I have used it in the rain and it still works. And like all of the other RF lenses, this lens is made from a polycarbonate material, which is an engineered plastic. I do like the matte look and the feel that you get from the material. I think another advantage for using this material for lenses like this is that if you drop it, it's more likely to bounce and there will probably be less damage than if the actual lens was made out of metal. But don't quote me on that because I'm not sure if that's true. Alright, here is the lens hood. It's pretty massive. When you put it on the lens, it kind of makes it look like you're using a 70 to 200 just because of how much it actually extends the length of the lens. So this is what you're going to be working with right there. The number one reason I love this lens is the image quality, which is to be expected. Canon's pretty much throwing everything that they have into this lens in terms of their knowledge of optical design, and it really shows because I've really tried to put this in some tough scenarios where you would get some of that color fringing and a lot of flare, and it held up pretty well. There were two things that I was really surprised with when I started shooting with this lens. Number one being the corner sharpness. I've never had the experience of shooting with the lens wide open and getting the same image quality in the corners as you do in the center. And functionally, I think that kind of opens you up to a few different things. You might be more willing to experiment with more creative compositions where you're placing your portrait subjects on the edges of the frame. For landscape, this lens would be absolutely amazing. I do tend to go with a zoom for landscape just because I like the versatility with that, but I definitely want to try this out. The other thing I really love about this lens is that there's really no compromise when you're shooting at f1.2. So if you're opening the aperture up all the way, in the past, you could expect to take a hit on contrast and sharpness and overall resolution, but with this, I have absolutely no problem shooting at f1.2 because you're getting similar image quality than you would if you were to stop this lens down. One more thing that really surprised me when I was shooting with this lens was the autofocus speed. In the past, when I shot with Nikon, I used to have their 85mm 1.4 G lens. I actually ended up trading that lens because the autofocus was so slow. Now, to be fair, I haven't really shot anything that's been moving super fast, but I can tell just by the speed at which the lens focuses from something that's closer to something that's further away, it is way faster than that old Nikon that I had. One thing that I know for sure is that this lens will be able to keep up with a toddler that is at full sprint. Something that's pretty important to me when I purchase portrait lenses is that the lens is able to handle backlit situations pretty well. And I would say, given the amount of glass that's in this lens, the coatings actually do a pretty good job of handling the flare. And once in a while, I do like the creative effect that lens flare can give your image. In terms of chromatic aberrations, I really did try my best to get some of that green and purple fringing, but I was not successful. Here's an image where you would expect to get some of that color fringing, but you'll see that there's none at all. The type of autofocus motor that this lens uses is a ring type ultrasonic motor. That type of autofocus motor is going to allow you to get relatively fast autofocus speeds with all of this heavy glass in the lens. One thing to note is that this lens does not use the nano USM technology, which is something that you can find in the new RF 70 to 200 and the kit lens, the 24 to 105 f4 lens. The nano USM autofocus motor is more advantageous if you are doing video work because the focus is definitely smoother and a little bit quieter too. Thanks to the modern mirrorless technology, the autofocus acquisition for this lens is pretty spot on. As with any fast piece of glass, especially at f1.2, you just want to be careful in checking your focus for each picture because even if you're a little off, you'll definitely notice just because the depth of field is so shallow. So there's a few things that I don't like about this lens. The number one thing I don't like about this lens is that it is ridiculously expensive. I'd be willing to bet that the majority of photographers out there don't really need to pay for a premium lens like this when you can get 90% of the performance from the EF 85mm Mark II lens. And actually, if Canon comes out with the rumored 70 to 135mm f2 lens, I would definitely trade this in for that just because it's more versatile. Although I love shooting with this lens and it's really cool to see the image quality that comes out of it, I can personally say that this is overkill for me. I think that's about it for my thoughts on this lens. As always, I'll leave you with some pictures that I took with the lens. Let me know if you have any questions about this lens down below. And as always, if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe and like this video.